going to talk about Power Automate and SharePoint and how those interact. And in general, they interact very well. The integration is great, and there's a ton of stuff you can do in Power Automate to manipulate SharePoint. And you can do some really cool workflows and approval type stuff. In this video, I'm just going to focus on SharePoint lists. And I'm going to do some real simple flows here just to give you a feel for how it works and the different triggers and actions you can use when you're working in SharePoint. So I am on the Power Automate homepage here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit create here, and I'm going to create a new flow. And you can see there's some options up here. I'm going to use this automated cloud flow. And what this is going to do is this is going to be triggered by someone doing something in a SharePoint list. So either creating an item or modifying an item. And you can see there's a ton of triggers here, automated triggers. And two of the top three are these SharePoint ones. And so there's a ton here that you can explore if you want to. But I'm just going to say test notification. And I'm going to do this when a new item is created. And later I'm going to do when an item is created or modified. And there's some things that you should really be aware of when you're using that particular trigger. So I'm going to do when an item is created. So anytime someone creates a new item in SharePoint, this flow is going to run once. And then it'll never run again on that item that was created. And so the first thing you need to do is tell it what SharePoint site to go to. And they put some in here in the top of things that you might be using. The one I want to use isn't in here, so what you need to do is enter a custom value and then go get the URL of the site where the list is and paste it in there. So I'm going to be working with this gift ideas list here. And so if I create a new item in this list, this flow is going to kick off. And so if I hit that drop down, I'll see the list name. You should know you have to have access to this list in order to do this. So this flow is running on whatever your rights are as a logged in user, and it's going to respect the rights that you have on the list. So I'm going to add a new step here, and what I'm going to do is just simply send an email. And so I'll put in the name there. I'll do test. So what's cool here is in the subject, you can see that I get this dynamic content. And so it's already gone to that SharePoint list and pulled back the fields that are available to me. So in the subject here, if I wanted to, I could use a field from the SharePoint list. So I could say the gift, and then I'll say for, and then the name and the recipient. And so that'll tell me right in the subject line what the gift is and who the recipient is. And then in the body, maybe I'll just put the price. And so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And so another thing that you should be aware of is that if you create this flow on an active list that people are using, so at this point, this flow is live. So if this was a list that people were using, this flow would start running right away. So if you don't want that to happen, what you can do is you can turn off the flow while you're working through it. So you can turn it off here. But another thing you can do, and what I often do, is if I'm sending emails, instead of sending the email to the person that you want to send it to yourself at first, just so you can test and make sure everything's working like you expect it to work. And then you can go ahead and make it live with the correct email address of whoever that should be. So this is saved. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new item here. I'm going to say new car for my dad. And I'm going to buy him a real nice car. And we'll just say, let's say it's for his birthday. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And so we'll go to, if we go back to if you click on this arrow here and go back to the admin screen, you're going to see here that our flow will show up here in the history, in the run history. And so another thing you should know about Power Automate is that it doesn't necessarily run immediately. So on these automated flows, it sometimes can take a couple minutes before the flow runs. So just be aware of that. If you don't see it right away, it just hasn't run, and you're just going to have to wait. So I'll go ahead and refresh this. And then I'm going to go ahead and pause it here until this flow runs, and then come back and we can look at the result. Okay, so my flow ran and it did succeed, so that's good. And we can click in here and see what happens, or what happened. And so this is a great feature, especially as your flows get more complicated, because you can come in here and you can see exactly the steps and what it did. And if you have an error, it'll show you where the error is. And it's really helpful if you're troubleshooting flows that are not working or failing. So you can see this, when I created that item, the flow kicked off. It got that data from that item I created, and then it sent the email. And you can see new car for dad. That was the information that it pulled out of the list, and it went ahead and sent the email. So that's great. So that is if you just want to send a flow on the create. Now, if you want to send something on create or modify, then we're going to go ahead. We're going to do that because, and actually, this is kind of the more common use case. And I'm going to say create automated cloud flow when an item is created or modified. And we'll call this on submit. And we'll go ahead and create that. So one of the reasons why I've had to use this more often than not is because if you have, let's say, a relatively complicated form or SharePoint list, and you're gonna run a flow, let's say an approval flow or a notification type flow, a lot of times what you're gonna do is you're gonna ask the user to put in information, and you're gonna allow them the opportunity to save it and come back to it, or put in information and not submit it right away. So they're going to be saving that information into a SharePoint list. That list is going to be created, but then you don't necessarily want to send the flow right when it's created if their intention was not to submit that right away. So what you want to do is you want to do on item creator modified, and then you want to look for that submitted flag. And so there's different ways you can do that. You can make it a separate field. You can make it a drop down. There's a bunch of different ways. So for now, I'm going to do it based on a field called note. And we're going to look at every time an item is created and modified, we're going to look at that note field. And if it says submitted, then we're going to go ahead and run the rest of the flow. So again, I got to put in this custom value here. I got to find the SharePoint site. And then we'll get our list. And then, so the first thing I'm going to do is do an if then. So I'm going to say if the note is equal to submit, then it's submitted, and then we're going to do an email here. But if the note field is not equal to submit, then we're going to do nothing. So if someone creates an item and they do a few things, but we don't have that submit in that note field, then it's going to run and nothing's going to happen. Then later they come in, the submit is in the note field there, and then it's going to go ahead and kick off this email. So you've already seen how you can use the dynamic content. So I'm not going to do that again here. I'm just going to put test. And then what I'm going to do, so the big thing that you have to be aware of when you're using this trigger is that if you go, so what we want to do is after this, we find that if submit and we send an email, we don't want to send an email again to the person. And so we want to remove that submit from that note field, because if we don't and someone goes in there and modifies it again, it's going to see that submit and then it's going to send the email again, a duplicate email. And so what you usually want to do is, if you run it on a condition like this, you want to go in and update the list item and remove that submit. But what you have to be very careful of is if you're modifying a list item that has this trigger on it, you have to make sure that you have a condition in here that's going to terminate the flow if it's not met, because otherwise you're going to get into this endless loop situation. So if I update this item and I put note is equal to submit, then this would continue to run forever, because every time it's going to run, it's going to see submit, it's going to modify itself, and because it was modified again, this is going to run again because it's modified, and it's going to see submit, it's going to run again, and on and on and on. So you have to make sure if you're updating an item that has this trigger, you need to make sure that you have something in there that's going to terminate it once it gets to the condition at the top here. So I'm going to go ahead. So this is also a good example of another very useful action in SharePoint, and that's the update item. And so the update item, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but you just tell it, again, the site, the list idea, and then your ID. And so we have an ID from when the item was created or modified here. We can use that ID. So we're updating this same item. And then we have to, once you put in the ID, it pulls back the fields that you need to put in. So one thing to note is this title here, this is a required field, so it's going to make you put information in here. And this should really be just the title of the item of what the person put in before. So that's something with this update item that you might have to do, is you have to use the data from the trigger to put in these required fields. Because if you put something else in here, then it's going to overwrite whatever the user put in this in the field when they filled out the form. So these other ones are actually, we don't have to worry about these. These will keep the values that went in initially. And so this is something to be aware of too. This purchased, this is based on a yes, no field. And if the default is no, you might not necessarily want that. You want to get what the user put in. So I'm going to put what they actually intended and purchased. Okay, so with fields that have a default, you're probably going to want to put in that field too, so it doesn't get overwritten by the default when this is updated. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save on this, and then we're going to go back to the demo here, and I want to show you two situations here. So one, let's create a new one, and we'll call it and then we'll say not purchase. We're going to save this, but we're not going to put submit in that note field. And so what's going to happen is it's going to run, and it's going to it should hit this no condition. So note is not going to equal submit, so it's going to hit this, and nothing's going to happen. The flow is going to stop. Now, if I go into, okay, so here's the, what we definitely want to do is in this no field is put already submitted. So I forgot to do that, and since I forgot to do that, it would have resulted in an infinite loop, because it would have updated this item, and the note would have been submit, and it wouldn't have changed that because there's no default here. And so it would have ran again and again and again. So you can see how easy it is to create an endless loop here. And they even warn you up here in the flow checker that when you're working in this kind of trigger, so you can see here, they give you a nice little warning. Okay. All right. Okay, so you can see this ran, and so let's look at it. And you can see it was false, so nothing else happened. So I'm going to do one here where we actually, so let's say the new house one, we want to make an edit there. I'm going to say, you know what, I can't really afford to do that. So I'm going to say, how about a new kitchen table? And we'll do 500. And then, so here I'm going to say submit. And so now this flow is going to run again, and it should kick out an email now. And so I'm just going to wait for it. And so I'm going to pause it here. Okay, so the flows ran, and you can see that it ran twice, and that's because the first time it ran, it updated the item, and then since the item was updated, it ran a second time. So let's go back in there and check it out. So you can see our condition was met, so it went ahead and it sent this email, and then we updated this item, and we changed that note to already submitted. And so if I go back and look at the flow that ran after that modification, it's not going to meet the condition, right? Because the note field is now already submitted. So those are probably the two most common ways that Power Automate and SharePoint kind of work together, is running these flows based on that trigger action of create new or create or modify. And now there's a ton of other ways that you can work with SharePoint data from Power Automate. And I'm going to get into those in some different videos because this one's already getting a little bit long. And so keep an eye out for those other ones. All right. Thanks for watching.